Limitless Festival. Thank you so much. A wonderful worshiping community. You can take a seat. Why don't you high five three people and say, let's have a go at. Let's have a go at. That's what we're going to do. Let's have a go at. Praise Jesus. Who's enjoying Limitless Festival so far? Come on. He's just getting started, friends. He's just getting started. He's got some wonderful things to do in our hearts and our lives. And I believe wholeheartedly he has something for us this morning. Do you agree with me? Yeah? Come on. Well, I believe with all of the conviction inside of me that Jesus changes lives. I'm glad you agree. I believe that he, Jesus Christ, is the answer to the longing of our souls. He is the answer to the prayers that we can pray. He is the need, the missing point often for our lives and our hearts. And I say this with such conviction because Jesus has been changing my life now for 15 years. 15 years every single day. And for the rest of my days, he will continue to change my life. Doesn't mean that I've come to a conclusion yet. Doesn't mean that I'm perfect. Doesn't mean that I've got everything together. But it does mean that slowly but surely, Jesus is continuing to show himself to me so that I may become more like him. Today, we are going to do something that we are calling on the morning sessions, Let's Have a Go At. And what we're going to have a go at this morning, which I'm really excited about, is listening to God. I believe wholeheartedly that some of you this morning, you are going to hear the voice of Jesus for the first time in your life. I believe for some of you this morning, you are going to prophesy for the first time in your life. I believe for the first time this morning, for some of you, God is going to use you as you minister to one another to impact someone else's life. And I believe that because that is the heart of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. To listen to his voice and to obey him as we follow him. We're going to do that together by looking at John chapter 10 together. And there's this famous passage in John chapter 10 where Jesus speaks to someone about what it means to follow him and what it means to listen to him. But before we get to John chapter 10, I'm going to just use these next few moments to speak about John chapter 9. Is that okay? Come on, you can speak to me. I'm a Pentecostal preacher. You can holler back at me all you want. Is that okay? Good. John chapter 9, there's this amazing story that I absolutely love. It's one of Jesus' most prominent healings and one of Jesus' most prominent miracles. He encounters someone as he is ministering. He is going through the villages, towns, and cities, and he starts to minister through signs and wonders, through the preaching of the gospel, through declaring that he is the Messiah and the Savior to all the world, all which we believe still happens today. And he comes across someone who is blind. Now, this man is known in his neighborhood. He is known in his village for being blind. He was actually blind from birth, and there was questions because of the way society was back then as to why he was blind. Perhaps it was something that he did. Perhaps it was something that his family did. And people knew who he was because of the nature of this blindness. Now, he heard Jesus was coming to town. And as he heard Jesus was coming to town, he thought, perhaps this man of miracles, the man that they call Jesus, can do something for me. So he finds him, he goes looking and hunting for Jesus and eventually comes across him. And he asks Jesus to perform a miracle. He says, Jesus, I'm blind and I would love to see. So Jesus responds in the way that Jesus does to hungry hearts. He makes like a paste out of mud and he puts it on this man's eyes and he says to this man, if you will go to the pool in which you normally are, people know you for living by this pool, go there and wash and you will start to see God at work. So this man with mud in his eyes, he starts to meander back to this pool that was famous and known. He goes into the pool and there's the religious people at one side, non-religious at the other side. His family are there, his friends are there, people he knows, and they know him. He goes into the pool and he starts to wash his eyes, and there before him, he starts to see for the first time in his life color. As he starts to see color, he starts to notice that something is changing. So he goes again and he washes his eyes and then he looks up and for the first time in his life, he starts to see figures and shapes. He washes again and then this time as he comes up, he opens his eyes and for the first time, he starts to see faces the people that have been speaking to him for his whole life. He starts to speak to the religious people and the non-religious people, and he starts to realize that Jesus has completely healed his blindness. So in this moment, he starts to get so excited, as I imagine many of us would, and he starts to celebrate in the pool, and he starts to jump and shout, and he actually runs out of the court where this pool is, and he is running around saying, I once was blind, but now I see. The religious people, they see him, and as they see him, they go, isn't that blind man? He's been blind from birth. Isn't that him? So they approach him. And they say, aren't you that man that was blind from birth? You're always by the pool. And he looks back to him and he said, no, it is me. You're right. I was blind, but now I see. How is this, they ask. And here's what he replies. I encountered that man that they call Jesus. That man that they call Jesus. I don't know who that man they call Jesus is to your life. I don't know how well you know him. I don't know what he's done for you so far here at Limitless Festival. I know he's been doing wonderful things. But when you encounter that man they call Jesus, let me tell you, friends, everything changes. Everything shifts and moves in our lives, our paradigm and our vision and how we see the world and ourselves. It starts to move and change because that man they call Jesus does something incredible in our lives. He heals us. He speaks to us. And he asks us to follow him. Why do I say this? Well, I believe just one encounter from that man that they called Jesus can really shift our life. And I say it because when we get to John 10 in a moment, Jesus is actually speaking to this man. This man's had an encounter. His life has been turned around. He chooses to follow Jesus. He faces rejection. The religious people no longer want to see him. They think, oh, you've had an encounter with that man. We don't want you anymore. And he finds Jesus again. He says, Jesus, what does it mean to follow you? I'm facing rejection all of a sudden. I want to know what it means to follow you. And Jesus speaks to him. And you think the words that he shares with this man at the beginning of his journey must be really important. We're going to read that in a moment. And then we're going to hear a short story on the comfy chair from one of our friends who knows what it means to listen to the voice of God. But first, I had an encounter when I was 16-year-old with this man that they called Jesus. I wasn't someone that had any interest in faith. I wasn't someone that had any interest in Christianity. I certainly wasn't someone that had any interest in that man that they called Jesus. I'd heard about him. My parents had spoken about him. I've been to church a few times, and I knew that people spoke about that man that they called Jesus. I know even today, people choose to follow that man called Jesus. When I was 16 years old, I didn't want anything to do with that man called Jesus. I ended up moving in with my grandparents, and my parents moved away to be part of a church. And one weekend, they asked me to come home so I could be with them. So I traveled up to the northeast of England. We got anyone from the northeast of England in the room? We do. I traveled up to the northeast of England, and I didn't know anyone, and I had no friends there, no connections there, no people that I spent time with. And as I was there on the Sunday morning, my mum knocked on my door in the room that I was staying in, and she said, do you want to come to church? And I thought, well, I've got nothing else to do, so I'll come to church. I went into church, and I sat at the back of this church hall. There's around 40 or 50 people in this church hall. There was no one under the age of 40. I was 16 years old, and I was thinking, I don't really know why I've got here. I don't really know why I'm here, but we'll see how it goes. The preacher gets up, the preacher starts to preach. It had no relevance to me whatsoever. He gave a call for anyone to follow Jesus, and it didn't speak to me, and I didn't respond. In fact, I moved seats because I was a little bit awkward. I put my headphones in, and I was just waiting for my mum and dad to finish church so that I could go home. And then I started to realize that the church service had ended, and there was this old man who I now know who was called Albert. Albert was in his 70s. And he, with his walking stick, started to walk up the aisle, and I was sat to the left-hand side, and he walked up this aisle, and I started to realize that he was trying to make eye contact with me, and for the first time in my life, I prayed, Jesus, please don't let this man speak to me. Albert came up to me with a walking stick, and he wandered across, and he sat next to me, and of course, from politeness, I took out my headphones, and I kind of acknowledged him. And he said, your name's Shaun, isn't it? I said, yeah, that's right. He said, I've been speaking to your parents about you. I know a little bit about your story. And I said, oh, okay, this is going to be fun. He said, can I pray for you, Shaun? Because this morning, before I came into church, I have this practice where I read my Bible every morning, and I ask God if he's got anything to say to me for the day. And I felt God say something to me today. I felt God say that there was going to be a young person for the first time in years that was going to walk through this church building. And I felt God say to me that I was going to pray for this young man. So I came into church, I saw you at the back of the hall, and I thought, you must be the person that God was speaking to me about. Can I pray for you? I said, Albert, go for it. Albert put his hand on my shoulder and he asked if he could do so. I said, yeah. I closed my eyes and he just said, just let me pray. And he prayed these words. He prayed that God would reveal himself to me. He prayed that I would hear the voice of God throughout my life. He prayed that I would go on to follow him and know him and be with him. He prayed that I would have communion with God. He prayed that the great shepherd would come and speak into my life. He prayed that the love of God would push back anything that is holding me back and release me into the purpose and freedom that God has for me. And as he prayed these prayers, friends, let me tell you, for the first time in my life, I got a glimpse of that man that they call Jesus. I started to cry because I started to realize that he is everything that I needed in that moment. Now me and Albert, we didn't have anything in common. He didn't listen to the same music to me. He didn't wear the same clothes as me. In fact, he was actually wearing some shoes that are now back in fashion. They were Crocs. And this was 15 years ago, friends. We didn't listen to the same music. We didn't watch the same sports. We didn't have the same friends. There was nothing of Albert that I would have been drawn to or wanted to follow or wanted to speak to. There's nothing of relevance between us. But here's, friends, what I have learned. That relevance doesn't change people, but faithfulness to Jesus absolutely does. And I'm so thankful that Albert, in his 70s, listened to Jesus. Because if Albert didn't listen to Jesus, I don't know if I would be stood here right now. There is power, so much power, when we learn to listen to the voice of Jesus. Before we go into the comfy chair, let me put this scripture up for you. It's John chapter 10. This blind man comes to speak to Jesus, and he says these words to him. He's like, what shall I do? How do I follow you? How do I learn to do life with you? And here's the words that Jesus said to this man. He said, those who enter by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. And Jesus here is saying, I'm the shepherd, and my people who follow me are sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep, the people of God, they listen to his voice. And he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he has brought out all of his own, he goes ahead of them. And his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow the voice of a stranger. In fact, they will run away because they do not recognize the voice of the stranger. Jesus here is trying to get something across very specific to this person and to us this morning. And here's what it is. It's a quote from an author called John Mark Comer, and he says these words: one of the singular most important tasks of the Christian faith is learning the art of hearing the voice of Jesus. I wonder whether we could, in a moment, when the comfy chair jingle comes on at the end, I wonder whether you could give a wonderful, wonderful, warm welcome to a friend of ours that is going to come share some stories. Let's hear the comfy chair jingle.
Yeah, oh, it's the comfy chair. Yeah, oh, it's the comfy chair. Yeah, oh, comfortable.
So, are you comfortable?
It's not called the comfy chair for no reason, I'll say that.
Great, I'm so glad. So, as Shaun said, this morning is all about the theme of listening to God. And that's something that is quite important in your testimony. So we're going to hear a little bit about that just now. But let's go to you. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then you can go on to say how you became a Christian and what that was like.
Cool. Good morning, everyone. Hope you all slept well. My name's Eloise. I'm 18, and I'm from Weston-super-Mare.
Yeah. We love Weston.
So I first became a Christian when I was around 7. And I'd always been brought up in a Christian home. All my family are Christian. So it's kind of the norm for me to go to church every Sunday, go to youth group. But I wasn't really sure kind of what the title of a Christian meant. So I kind of just went because my family went and my parents went. But yeah, I've been going pretty much my whole life.
Cool. So you became a Christian, obviously very young. When you first became a Christian, did you hear God's voice?
No. No.
Full stop.
Full stop, end of.
Explain a bit about that.
So, yeah, it's so normal for me, like when I was younger, to hear God's voice. Like I was used to people saying, oh, it's like a booming voice, it's really loud. And that kind of scared me a little bit, and it kind of put me off wanting to hear his voice. But I thought that you had to do something, like I didn't know if there was a way of like praying or speaking to God in order to kind of hear something from him. So no, never heard from him, didn't really know what it would look like or sound like, so I didn't have a clue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell us a bit then about how your faith sort of progressed into the next stages of your life.
So I started secondary school, and my main focus of school was to find a group of friends. That was probably one of the most important things for me, because I'd always struggled with anxiety and kind of meeting new people, and that was probably the main focus. And instead of giving that over to God, I was like, nah, I can figure it out. Like, I'll be all right. And I did find a group of friends, but now looking back, I probably could have asked God to help me kind of feel more at peace going into like a new place with new people.
Mm-hmm. So that was secondary school. Now let's go on to college. How are we progressing there?
So I started college. Again, the same thing, find the right group of people, make friends, because it was a brand new place. I'd never been there before. And again, I took control of it all myself. And that was probably one of the biggest mistakes I think I could have made. I ended up getting involved with a really bad group of people. I had a really bad relationship with someone. I got really bad mental health, really bad self-esteem. I just didn't feel like myself anymore. And kind of the really good relationships that I had made with friends and family, like broke just because of how much I changed as a person since starting college. So yeah, I definitely should have gone to God for that.
So obviously we've chatted quite in depth. Eloise is in my youth group, by the way, so I know her quite well. But you did have a good few low moments throughout college. So in terms of hearing from God, do you think you heard from God during those low times?
Yeah, now looking back, I kind of felt this guilt every day whenever I went into college, and seeing this person and these group of people. It was kind of feeling inside of me like, maybe you shouldn't be doing this, but I ignored it because I was like, no, like I need to find people to get along with, like I can't be on my own. And now looking back, that was definitely God telling me, like, Eloise, what are you doing? Like, this isn't smart, this isn't you. Like, you need to make the right choices, but I just chose to ignore it because I thought I knew better.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us can sort of resonate with that. We take matters into our own hands. Sometimes if we don't understand how to hear God's voice, we think, well, I'll just do it myself and that'll work out, and it doesn't always, in fact, rarely. So you're here today talking about listening to God. So we're assuming that means that you hear from God now. So how did you get to this place where you hear from God, and what is that like?
So I started discipleship with Christy.
Yes.
And I wasn't really sure what it was going to be like because my faith wasn't the best. But it was probably one of the most awesome decisions I made ever. I now know how to pray, read the Bible, hear from God, and kind of hearing each other's stories when we meet up is just so encouraging, knowing that God is kind of working in each other's lives in different ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, so this might be helpful to, well, pretty much everyone, because sometimes when we think about hearing God's voice, we do think like what you said at the start, is it going to be a booming voice from the sky? But it rarely ever is. So I know you've got some sort of like everyday examples of how you hear from God. I think that could be helpful for people to hear.
Yeah. So last summer, me, my mum and my dad, were praying for me to find Christian friends, because pretty much everyone that goes to my church is my family. So there was this one girl called Amy, and she started uni in Weston, and then she came to church on a Sunday, and literally we clicked, like instantly. We've met up quite a few times after church. Like we go out for coffees, and we pray for each other, like we send each other little TikToks. And it's just really great knowing that there is someone actually in my church who is in the same position as me, and I can speak to them about the same things. And then when I started my second year of college, the same again, praying for friends. And there's a guy who goes to my college called Zeke, who is somewhere in the audience today. And I overheard him speaking to a group of boys in my class about like church, like going to church, what it means to be a Christian. And I thought to myself, I was like, well, if Zeke can do it, surely I can do it. So it was just a random point during the day. We were just speaking. And then I asked him, I was like, do you know about Limitless? And he's like, yeah, like I went there last year. I was like, oh, so cool, like I'm going. And he's like, no way, like what? And I was like, yeah, like I'm on the comfy chair this year. And he's like, shut up, really? You go to church?
Is that how he talks?
No, that's just my boy impression.
Cool. Just checking.
And then, so yeah, I was like, I go to church, he goes to church. And it was just so cool, like having that common interest with someone, like relating to them, knowing that they're in the same position as me as well.
And that was another answer to prayer then, about praying for friends. Mm-hmm. And tell us that other example about hearing God's voice. So I failed my maths exam 5 times now. Right, who needs maths anyway?
Who needs it? So I resat in June.
It's caused quite a stir, Eloise.
Yeah, I know.
Everyone loves the times tables.
And in the morning of my maths exam, I was like really anxious. I was like, I'm probably not going to pass, like whatever. And I'd previously been hearing this song called ABBA. And it's like quite a strong song, quite a powerful song to me now. And as I was getting ready, I just sat at my desk and I opened up my phone and I opened up TikTok, and the first thing that came up was that song. And it was kind of like a reminder from God, like, you are at peace. Like, you can go into this exam with no anxiety, no worry, because I'm with you. And like, whatever happens, happens. Like, yeah, it just put me so at peace that song came on and it was just there.
Yeah, and so from getting to know you more over the last year or so, it's been clear that we figured out God doesn't always speak to us in a loud booming voice, but it is in the little answers to prayer, and it is in the songs that he speaks to us through. It's in these small things that we could seem like are insignificant, but God is in the fine details, which has been all over your life, which has been amazing to see. So my last question then, before we wrap up, what's the difference from when you first became a Christian to now? So why do you think you hear from God now more than you did?
Definitely because I've started reading my Bible a lot more, but not only reading it, but also paying attention to what I'm reading, because it's so easy to just read it, close it, and then forget. But actually, like, paying attention to what I've read and then applying it into my life, and also praying a lot more frequently. And then just like worshiping, listening to worship music. It's just, the whole thing as a collective, it's just really, really helped.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much. And I'm sure you all show your support to Eloise. That's us done. Ready?
Yeah, oh, it's the comfy chair. Yeah, oh, it's the comfy chair. Yeah, oh, comfortable.
It is comfortable. It is comfortable. I'm so thankful for that story there from Eloise, and some of the stories you've just heard there, some of the testimonies you've just heard. You'll have noticed, as Christy was saying, that it's how God speaks through our everyday life in small moments, in different ways. There's not one size shoe that fits all. God speaks through a variety of different ways, and we're going to explore that in a moment. There's a quote that I once heard from Paula de Assi, and it says these words: God comes to us disguised as our life. God comes to us disguised as our life. And sometimes there's just moments in our life where we just start to sense that God is speaking through the patterns of life, the flow of life, the following of Jesus through everyday life. Now, you know, Limitless Festival, that we're doing our mornings differently. I referenced this earlier. We're having a go at it. So this isn't just about hearing one person's thoughts on how to listen to the voice of Jesus, but this is about you doing it. And we want to give that a go this morning. So we're going to follow a flow from John chapter 10 that we read earlier, when Jesus is speaking about the sheep following the shepherd, Jesus being the shepherd, we being the sheep. And I believe that God wants to speak to us through a variety of different ways. And we're going to go through 3 really simple principles from John 10. We're going to put them into practice, and I want to give you a heads up. In a short moment, we are going to be encouraging you to pray. We're going to be encouraging you to listen to the voice of Jesus, and we're going to be encouraging you to speak out that which you are sensing to some of the people around you. Who is ready to give that a go this morning? Yeah? Now, I know for some of you, you'll have never done that before, and I want to say this is a safe place. We want to help facilitate that, so we're going to coach you through what that looks like. And we want you to know that there is no pressure on us here. It is God that does the talking and God that does the speaking. All we have to do is listen and obey. Okay, 3 principles from John 10 that we're going to follow in just a short moment. They're going to come up on the screen here. Firstly, he calls his people by name. It says in John 10 verse 3, he calls his own sheep by name and he leads them out. In just a moment, we're going to pray for some people. And here's what I was sensing as I was trying to listen to the voice of Jesus about what he may want to do through this principle. I've got a sense that there might be people in this room and you have had all kinds of names spoken over you. You have all kinds of, people have said all kinds of things over your life that have stuck with you. And it's difficult to remove yourself from them. In the Bible, Jesus says that when we follow him, we become a new creation, that the old is gone and the new has come. And for some of us, it feels like that old life still dominates the way we live. And I believe this morning, not through my preaching or teaching or through my voice, but as we wait for the Holy Spirit, some of you are going to hear exactly what Jesus thinks about you, exactly what he calls you, and he's going to gently remove some of that old life from you. Okay? We're going to pray for that. Secondly, we are going to acknowledge that there are other voices competing for the voice of Jesus. And as we acknowledge them, we're going to learn how to ignore them. We're going to learn to ignore them. Whether you're aware of this or not, there are so many voices competing for the voice of Jesus in your life. We live in a world where there is so many voices trying to speak into our lives. There are voices of entertainment, voices of friends and family, voices of the enemy, voices of sin, voices of social media, so many voices trying to grab our attention, and so many voices that are trying to influence us in the way we do life. So many voices competing for the voice of Jesus to take the primary spot of influence on our lives. And friends, I want to say this, that there is something powerful when we learn to dial into the voice of Jesus and allow his voice to be the voice that guides our life. He is the voice, Jesus' voice, that can shift a season with one phrase. It is his voice that can heal broken bodies through one touch. It is his voice that can bring people out of darkness with one word. He is the voice of Jesus that can set the captives free, that can break off the chains and can propel us into the plans that he has for us. It is the voice of Jesus that saves lives. It is not the voice of man. It is the voice of Jesus that determines our future. It is not the voice of horoscopes. It is the voice of Jesus that redeems our past, guides and presents us with a new future. It is not the voice of self. It's his voice, the voice of Jesus that looks to lead us today, guide us today, shape us today, and speak through us today. But in order to do that, we need to learn to block out some other voices. So what we're going to do in a moment, we're going to go to the best way of hearing the voice of Jesus, and that is through his beautiful word, the Bible. I'm going to put 2 scriptures on the screen in a short while, and we're going to meditate over them and ask Jesus first to speak to us, and then secondly to speak to someone else. And then finally, we're going to put into practice what Jesus said. And one of the most common themes we find through his teaching, it says that he leads and we follow. And we're going to be brave because I believe Jesus wants to do that here this morning.